Hello and welcome to another episode of A View from the Top. I'm Adrian Cropley. A View from the Top is a regular podcast from the Centre for Strategic Communication Excellence, where I interview some of the world's leading communication professionals as we explore their career journey. I'm so excited to be chatting to today's guest, and we've actually not caught up in a while, so we're having quite a bit of a chat before we started today. But we definitely stalk each other on LinkedIn and through our dear friends within the profession. Priya Sarma, ABC, which stands for Accredited Business Communicator, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, is the head of corporate affairs and sustainability for Unilever Middle East and Turkey. She's a current board member of the Advertising Business Group, an organisation she formed back in 2016 and was also selected as one of the top 10 marketing game changers in 2020 by Campaign magazine. Priya is a very experienced communication professional leading in the profession in the Middle East. She's based out of the UAE and has made that shift from the world of advertising to marketing and then communications. She's very successful, and I might add she's a leader of influence and a board advisor in what I call a tough market. She certainly is an excellent leader and has achieved quite a lot in her career. So welcome, Priya. It's great to be talking to you today.
Hi, Adrian, and this sounds like such a blast from the past. Thank you for such a wonderful introduction, and I hope I live up, to that through the chat. But it's so wonderful to reconnect.
I have no doubt that if I think back, it's fabulous to catch up after so long, and it's not that we haven't been in touch for over 13 years, but 13 years ago is when we actually met and we started the Unilever accreditation program that we did in joint partnership with the IABC. And of course, my business then, Cropley Communication. And, it was such a special time to have some of your colleagues in Unilever and yourself do that accreditation process. Have you forgiven me yet?
Adrian, if I remember, I think we were the first cohort that kind of went through the program, and it was, for me, it was quite a game changer actually, and it really helped shift mindset for me, and more importantly, give me a high level of confidence in my own capabilities. So I have to thank you a lot for that program. It was really intense, but it really gave me a lot of focus. And a lot of times you go through programs, and like they say, you'll probably end up, imbibing or remembering 20%.
20%, yes, that's right.
Yes. But then, the way you conducted that program, one was that it was really brilliant because, of course, we had a great opportunity meeting face to face, I think, as a team more than once, and, really deep diving, week at a time into what you were teaching us. But for me, the most important part was that it actually came together at the end. If you remember, when we had to make our final presentations.
That's right.
And and for me, I think it was really brilliant because I remember sitting that night because we had to present the next morning, if you remember, and you were really specific, saying, guys, we're going to record this. You'll have only 10 minutes to present, and if you go over, it's not going to be to your benefit, kind of a thing. And I remember working on my presentation, and everything fell into place when I was pulling it together. And it was very work oriented, right? Because I then took that piece of work back to my business and presented it there. So for me, and again, don't want to toot my own horn, but it wasn't an easy course. And if I remember, there were just two of us who actually passed on the first go. So for me, yeah, and so for me, that's why it was a big game changer, because when I went into the course, it was like great opportunity to learn, meet up with the team, and so on and so forth. But at the end, like I said, for me, it was a mindset shift because it showed me personally that I could achieve a lot more. And like I said, it was very work oriented. So everything that I learned, I brought back into the business. And I think that was really the platform that allowed me to excel. So thank you.
You were quite welcome. And I have to say, it was one of those programs that really sorted thinking out, wasn't it? You came to it with your expertise. And I think for people, and I would say people like yourself, it was very validating to know that you were on the right track, but it gave you lots of solid thinking to actually apply back into the business. And it certainly wasn't easy, but boy, it was intense. But I think it established relationships for a long time. And if I think about yourself and people like Elvira Mackey, who's been on our View from the Top podcast, and Shanahan Shu, Tilatam, who's still on my team, have done such a great job in using that information to build their careers. So I still feel like a very proud dad.
And you should, because the biggest benefit for us was that it was very tailored to our needs, right? It was a very specific program that you worked with Helena, who was a director at that time, comms director, and you guys really worked together to ensure that it met our needs. So it wasn't a generic program that we walked into, but it's very tailored to our needs.
And it was nicer that we were able to have a second cohort as we went through Unilever, and it was a great opportunity to then run some leadership coaching, which I went on to do. So just that time, I ended up working with the Unilever team for a number of years past that, and some of the exec communication leaders in coaching who have gone on and done some amazing things both in Unilever and other organizations. So good training, I think, when it's delivered well, actually works, and aligning it with things like professional qualifications. But your recognitions, you've done such an amazing job. When I see that you're sitting on boards now and advisory and starting organizations, and I'd love to explore those a little bit, because you're in that phase of your career now, and you notice I'm not using signs like you're at that age or it's a number of years. I'm not going to do that to either you or me, but it's with experience, it gives you an opportunity to give back. And I can see that's what you're doing in your career. But where did it start for you? What was it you wanted to be when you grew up?
So thanks. So I just wanted to add that in addition to the advertising business group, which I sit on the board, I helped set it up in 2016. I've continued to sit on the board. And of course, the launch of the Unstereotype Alliance, which was where I got recognized as the top 20 game changers. I now also sit on 2 new boards. So March of this year, I got nominated to chair this was amongst our members and peer companies. I now chair the Circular Packaging Association. And then more recently, I'm also on the board of the Multinational Companies Business Group, which is another association made up of the top, about, I think we've got 53 or 56 multinational companies as members. So yeah, those are the few, but it's been a journey to obviously get here. Yeah. Like you mentioned, I finished my MBA. And while I was doing my MBA, I was kind of very clear that I didn't want to get into core sales or marketing, right? And I was always very fascinated with advertising. So that's where I did all my summer trainings, internships, and then on completion, joined one of the top Indian ad agencies, and then got married to somebody who was in the similar field. He was a creative director.
Oh, really?
And yes. And, that's how it happens. And then we, very fortunately, just before we got married, he got an offer from the same agency network for Egypt. And we then moved to Cairo. And that's where I spent another 8 years working for a local agency and then another multinational. And that's when I had my twins. And so while it was great when I was single, I mean, as in, no familial ties, so to speak, once I had the kids, I was pretty clear at that time that I couldn't really continue in that field. Yeah. It doesn't really allow for a great work-life balance. And I took time off, but it also coincided with the fact that we moved from Egypt to Dubai. Yeah. And I had kept in touch with my clients, which were Unilever clients in Cairo, and some of who had moved here because Unilever had undergone a bit of a transformation in terms of how their marketing was structured into BD, business development, and, business and the brand building team. So brand development and brand building. So some of them had moved from Cairo to here. And that's when I heard about the role that they were looking for somebody to head the corporate comms department, which had just been set up. And that's how I ended up joining Unilever and getting into
What
communication.
what a great opportunity. I mean, so there was really a catalyst to make that switch and trying to do that juggle. But it sounds like there was great opportunities in those moves and obviously your connections to end up working for one of the biggest corporates in the world. So the first job in Unilever was doing what?
So I joined at that point of time to head the corporate comms
Right.
function. Yeah. And at that point of time, the what we call the MCO, multi-country organization, had just been set up. So prior to that, you had a business that was working out of the UAE and Saudi, another one that was independently working out of Egypt, another one in Morocco. But in
Yeah.
2007, that was a year before I joined, they pulled it together to form Unilever MENA.
Ah,
So
right.
that was the role I walked into. It was newly set up.
Yeah.
So that was the first, let's say, my first port of call. And that's what I did. I had to set up the team, and it was a very big task. So the first 5, 6 years, the team and I really focused on just employee engagement or internal comms, because that was really what the business needed.
Yes.
Because, like I mentioned, originally there were different businesses which now had come together to form Unilever MENA. And there continued to be five what we call business units. Each
Yeah.
had their own leadership team reporting into the head office, which was run out of the UAE.
Yeah.
So each of these businesses, like I said, so you had the Gulf business, had their own leadership team,
Yeah.
covered UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, Oman. You had the Saudi business then, which had their own leadership team. You had the Levant, managed out of Lebanon. You had the Mashriq business, managed out of Egypt.
Yeah.
And then the Maghreb business out of Morocco. Now, each of these is very different, right? They
Very.
kind of
Yes.
have their own mix of portfolios. They have their own priorities in terms of their own external challenges, opportunities. So it was really important that despite these differences, we really build one cohesive organization and really have employees focused. So that was a lot of what we did in the first few years.
Yeah.
And for me, so it's almost like a tale of two stories for me, in my
Yes.
journey at Unilever. So that first bit was a lot of the internal employee engagement bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And 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 in a way, it was also what we, besides the fact that that's what we needed to do, there wasn't a lot of opportunity for external engagement in
Yeah.
these markets at that point of
Yeah.
time. It was only in about 2014, 2015 that we started seeing an opportunity to start advocating and engaging externally with regulators and so on and so forth. Because especially in the UAE, that's when they started they started setting up associations and so on and so forth. So that's when I started. It was only in about 2015 that I started doing my external engagement work.
External work. And do you think that was very much what what was happening in the market globally at the time? Like communication, the discipline of communication was very segmented, into the internal versus external world. But as we see today, that the messages that we have internally is the same that we have externally and vice versa. And we've
Yes.
got this merging of technologies and channels. Do you think that's what kind of brought that together?
I would think so, although I think the Middle East was a little behind, right?
Right.
Because
Yeah.
markets like Europe are much more developed, especially with regards to advocacy and all of that. So, in a way, we had the advantage of learning a little bit from that. But also, what I've seen, and also for our governments out here, right? And it's absolutely brilliant because they tend to learn from what they're seeing in Europe, let's say, and
Yes.
get influenced by that. And it's very positive influence. So our ability to engage and influence is much, much higher. And
Yeah.
we see a lot of cohesive working between the regulators and the private sector out here. And it's at a very good place. They do look to us for expertise that we can bring from our global markets
Yeah.
and actually really work with them progressively.
Yeah. And look, because you have that ability to see across those different markets and bringing in, the knowledge and the expertise, do you think sometimes they sell themselves short a little bit and say, well, everything good is external to the Middle East, but there's some great practices that are actually coming up through the Middle East that, they should look internally.
I think I think it works both ways, Adrian. As in, I
Yeah.
think you should always try and borrow the best, right?
Yeah.
But you're correct. There are a lot of cultural nuances that you have to apply at the end of the day. You cannot be, you'd be kind of shooting yourself in the foot if you weren't sensitive to all of that. Absolutely. So yes, there is work that is coming up well. And I think there will be a point of time when I'm hoping we will be able to progress a little faster and accelerate a lot more. Because like I said, if you have the opportunity of being able to borrow, let's say even just on the concept of the circular economy, right? Europe has taken almost 20, 25 years to get to where they are. We are trying to now reach that same state in the next 5 years. So it's a very exciting journey. And we have the benefit of borrowing and seeing what worked and what didn't.
And there was, I can't remember who I was talking to the other day, but it was almost like there's different economies within the globe where they just skip over the generation. So they kind of go, right, so we were so far behind, but now we're actually jumping over that development period that a lot of other economies and communities have gone through. And we're now at the same level, if not, advancing in certain areas. So I think there's an advantage, isn't there, sometimes to go, actually, we don't have to do this in a very slow cultural pace. We can actually leap ahead with those learnings. So
absolutely. I mean, like we say, there's just borrow what you can in terms of learning and then figure out, both in terms of what works and what doesn't, in terms of what you want to do on the ground. So, and the great part is that the Middle East economy, especially on a sustainability front, they're becoming very aware, and they are trying to catch up as fast as they can, because one is that they see the benefit, or they want to avoid the negative impact, but they also want to ensure that they're not going to get left behind, right? And they're going to make the positive difference that they can.
Well, it's the ultimate reinventor, isn't it? Or inventing something new, particularly the UAE, how it's, look at Dubai over the years. Talk about a city that grew really fast. And it was all based around, we need to reinvent ourselves because, one day we won't have the oil and we won't have the wealth from that, but we will get the wealth elsewhere. And ingenuity and I think design and all sorts of things is coming out of the UAE, which is brilliant. But it's interesting, the question sometimes we get asked, or the perceptions that we get. I'm going to ask you a bit of an edgy question now about the challenges of being, you're a leader, you're female, and you're working in the Middle East. Do you see challenges in becoming the head of the game that you certainly have got to? Were there challenges along the way, or what are the things that you've observed of women in leadership roles in the Middle East?
You could say, Priya, you don't really know the language. So from a cultural perspective, how do you engage? But the great part is that, because of the culture, a lot out here is to do with relationship building. So it doesn't matter if you don't really speak the language, if you, so long as you are culturally sensitive and you engage with partners who have the same vision and ambition, it's not a problem. I've never faced a problem. And so with regards to your question really on senior leadership, also, I don't know how many people are aware, but the government is extremely progressive out here. And in 2020, when the cabinet reshuffle happened, they ensured that they had a 50-50 mix between men and women. And I have to say
that's better than most countries.
Yes. And I have to say, it wasn't just because they had that ambition. Each woman minister that you meet and speak to, they are brilliant. You can make out their passion, their performance, their engagement, their understanding of the subject, their ability to engage externally on a global platform. It's absolutely brilliant. Each one of them is more engaging than the other. Also, in the public sector, you actually have, I think, 60% of the women, of the people working in the public sector, are actually women. And I'm talking specific to the UAE.
Yeah.
And in fact, the private sector is nowhere near there. I mean,
Yeah.
even Unilever, which is ahead of the game, we have about 46% women in mid and senior management as of end 2022. Even we are ahead of the game, because in
That's a very
2014, I think we
positive
were at,
stat.
it is a very positive stand, but even we are kind of, we are kind of really ahead of the game. Most companies are not at that stage. And so there's a lot of work that, for instance, the UAE Gender Balance is looking to do to ensure that the private sector now starts catching up.
Yeah. And isn't it funny that the private sector now has to catch up with the government sector? And you'd think a lot of that would be coming out of the private sector. And it'd be interesting to see some of the research in other parts of the world, how that's going. But that's certainly not the impression I get here, or certainly not across the Asia market. And again, saying the Middle East as an entity is very different. The UAE is different to Saudi and Yemen and different places. But, in the UAE, it's obviously very progressive because it doesn't get there overnight. So the fact that there's a number of women in senior leadership roles, and the stats are, basically 50-50, if not better in some areas in terms of women in leadership roles, it's had to work at that over time.
Absolutely. So it's been, they've had the ambition, leadership, the UAE leadership has had the ambition. And even everything that you were mentioning in terms of, where Dubai is today, it's been a very planned journey for them.
Yes.
And I think COVID is a brilliant example of that long-term view that they took of where they wanted to go. That's really, I think, the UAE really, really stood out at that point of time with regards to not just vaccinations. Vaccines were available to everybody free of cost. The setup was brilliant. You could be in and out in less than 6 minutes. Just take your shot at your back.
I wish we had that, Priya, I can tell you.
And, and everything was the high level of, especially at that time, with regards to, when we were in the period of being locked up at home, the amount of engagement that the government had with the private sector to ensure that businesses were not negatively impacted, how could they work more effectively, it was really, really very strong. And I think that's the time when the UAE stood out. And like I said, it was with the ambition of having a long-term vision, right? So they have a 2050 plan. Dubai has recently, I think in January, they announced their 2023 plan. So, they have the 2023, 2050, 70 plan going forward. And so I think it's like some of the best companies, the way companies are run in the world. It's absolutely amazing. So even with regards to the private sector, some stats that I can share with you. So like I said, there is work for the private sector to be done, right?
Yes.
The World Federation of Advertisers, the WFA, in 2021, they conducted a census globally. And as the advertising business group, we supported them with regards to this market. And the data that we got from here was, and this is based on also on perceptions of people within the market, within the Marcom industry, right? And one of the key data points that came out was that while you get a lot of young women joining the Marcom industry, at the point that they join, there's at least a perceived salary gap between what women think they're getting vis-a-vis their male counterparts. They then start working up, and at the mid-management level, they manage closing that gap and actually doing better than their male counterparts. But it's at that point that the attrition starts happening.
Really?
And a lot of women, and a lot of women tend to leave the industry at that point of time, and which means that much fewer women are available for C-suite roles, and which is where we then again see the salary gap increasing.
Ah,
So that's obviously that census has now been redone again this year,
yeah,
which is in 2023. Again, as ABG, we have supported,
yeah,
but the results will only be announced, I think, at Cannes Lions later this month. So we don't know what the results are, but we are very clear that as an industry that there is work to be done, right?
yeah,
And so what we are doing, but the ABG is one association, right? But like
yeah.
the ABG, you have many others. You have 3, 4 others, and we are all trying to now come together to see how we can deep dive on this one data point to try and figure out where does the issue lie,
Yes,
to
that would be really
prevent,
fascinating. Yeah.
yes, is to really figure out what are the issues and what is the support that is there for needed to keep women and continue to attract them so that you have an adequate talent pipeline as you move up.
That's right, because I mean, if they're all, you get this great attrition before it hits that C-suite roles, that becomes really problematic. So it'd be interesting to unpack that
Yeah,
data point. I am so going to have to get you back on another
sure.
podcast. In fact, there was 2 topics we talked about earlier, and this being one of them, because I'm really fascinated to unpack that data. But the other is obviously your passion, which is in sustainability and circular economy, and we will do a special episode on that one just for our members down the track, Priya, because I would love to be able to talk to you again. But before I wrap, I just want to tap back into, you've had this amazing career, and now you are sitting on board, you're the head of function in Unilever there. Tell me a little bit about your current role, obviously not giving away too much about what you're working on in Unilever, but
Yeah.
what's the breadth of your role now? Because it's the head of communication and sustainability, and so what does that include?
So
Yeah.
till about 2019, I was heading corporate comms, but that was the point of time when, so for us till then, we only had a global sustainability team. But in 2018, 2019, they started thinking, the global team thought that it's wise to have feet on the ground, right? Because markets tend to be different from global functions. Because while you can prepare policies at a global level and yes, build reputation, and that's been done brilliantly for Unilever, a lot of the work tends to happen on the ground. So
Yeah.
I don't have a sustainability background, but my executive vice president at that time knew how passionate I was about the study, about the subject, right? So, because at that point, it was at that point that I had set up the ABG, and which today, by the way, we at 2016 when we set it up, we had 18 members. We now have more than 60 members
Yeah.
across not just advertisers, but platforms, agencies, research agencies, and our members actually account for almost 70% of the ad spend.
Wow.
So we've really built it up. There is a sustainability work stream that I'm going to be leading this year, given the fact that we've got COP28 happening here.
Yes.
And at that point, I was also representing the MCBG, which is the Multinational Companies Business Group. I today sit on the board, but at that time I was just a part of the MCBG.
Yeah.
But I got nominated to represent the MCBG on a UAE private sector advisory council that had been set up by the government on the SDGs. This was very specific. And that's when I worked with the UAE Gender Balance Council and did a lot of other things. So that was, I think, my leeway and interest and my own realization that this is the work that I love doing. I love doing the work on advocacy. And in 2020, actually, when COVID hit,
Yeah.
the person who took over my role, the corporate comms, she left exactly at that point of time. So, so I was managing sustainability, but I also got the corporate comms bit back.
There you go.
And that's where I have continued to work. But I have to say, I'm not, and I have to clarify, Unilever has undergone another transition, right? A transformation last year.
Yeah.
Most would be aware. So today, my role is, well, it's a bit of a tongue twister. So I manage
Shall we try it?
sustainability. I manage sustainability for Middle East, Turkey,
Yeah.
but I manage the corporate affairs for the Middle East, but very specifically for 2 of our categories, which is I support them on their comms need for the home care and the beauty and well-being. But on the ground, I do everything that is needed for, let's say, this market, because that's where my relationships sit, right? Yeah, because like I mentioned at the start, everything out here is a lot relationship based.
Yes.
So I head on the circular, I do all the advocacy work on the circular economy because I now chair the circular economy. I do it on D&I because that's another big topic for Unilever and it's a big topic for the country and the region. So I lead the Unstereotype Alliance. And so those, I think, and now I'm also heading the working group under the MCPG on the COP28. So that's a little bit of how it kind of comes together.
Yeah.
And I have to say, it's not like I have a team really, right? But it's, in my view, the way I bring it together is, like I said, again, I'm not a core sustainability person, but my role is to advocate for the sustainability priorities that are important to both Unilever and the country.
And if anybody wants to see how much you do advocate, is check your LinkedIn profile, because I notice you're speaking at different forums and on different panels, and I get so chuffed when I see your LinkedIn profile of you. This is the thing, when you get to be as accomplished as somebody like yourself and leading in an organization, that the value is who you are and the value you have to those relationships that you build. And that's where, you've been asked to attend to the different conferences and speak at those conferences.
Yeah.
So this is what true influencers are about, Priya.
Well, that's amazing that you can encapsulate it like that. There was a certain point of time, Adrian, when I was like, what is my role? I'm a communicator, but what is the impact that I'm delivering, right? Until I realized communication is really the start to driving change.
Yeah.
And which is why, despite the fact that I have a really overpacked agenda, I really think it is my responsibility to share. And this is what Unilever is very good at doing, right? We really believe in collaboration and we do believe in sharing our expertise. So, which is why I feel very blessed to be at a company like Unilever, which aims to ensure that you're really enhancing, you're working on your passion. It's not about force fitting you somewhere else.
That's right. It's not, we'll just keep giving you the list of things to do.
My God, no, absolutely. And one of the things we found is that people have their passion areas. Like for me, I'm not passionate about, let's say, something like PR. I'm just not. And I tell people I'm not, and I'm not a great. And I was telling somebody the other day, I'm a communicator, but I don't really consider myself. I hate talking about what I do per se, but I automatically go towards the whole collaborative bit. That's where I, put my energy in.
Yeah, well, and that energy shows, Priya. And I'm so sorry we're out of time for this episode. This is why I have to catch up with you again, and we'll do some deep diving into some of the topics. But maybe one of the last words from you, Priya. What's one nugget of advice you would give to communication professionals building their career? What's the biggest lesson maybe you've learnt you'd like to share with others? So
I think the biggest one is, don't let your job description define what you're going to do. And I'll tell you my own story and why I say this is that, when the opportunity to set up the self-regulatory advertising business group came up, the opportunity wasn't really presented to me. I just got called in by my executive vice president to a meeting along with somebody senior from another function. And, he outlined the need for setting up such a platform because it didn't exist out here. And we thought it was very important for the industry to have a platform where they could, the Marcom industry, where they could get together and work collectively. But for 6 months, that person didn't really do anything. And that's when I grabbed the opportunity. And in a way, that's where I found my passion also, right? So it's very important that you don't let your job description really just don't let it define who you are. Just take every opportunity. And it's very important that we keep enhancing our own capability building. Challenge yourself, take on something new, roll with it. But it's very important that you do it with passion and purpose and integrity, because people see that. And don't get swayed by just taking on those things which you think will automatically get you eyeballs. It doesn't work like that. Do the work that you are passionate about, do it really well, and it'll serve you its own reward.
Brilliant. So passion and a purpose to it. And thank you so much again, Priya, for taking this time to join me on A View from the Top. To all of those out there, I look forward to the next episode of A View from the Top. If you want to get ahead in your career and battle the accreditation process, or now certification process, talk to us at the Centre for Strategic Communication Excellence, and we can work with you to develop an in-house program. Priya, thank you again, and thanks to all of our listeners for joining us today, and look forward to hearing from you next time.